In people with cannabis use disorder, how long does brain recovery take after stopping cannabis use? This is a new review out of Italy that includes results from 26 studies. And yes, while some people might not like it, there does seem to be deficits in aspects of cognition like memory, sustained attention, and executive function from chronic, heavy cannabis use in some people. But also, we're learning how adaptive the brain is at returning to its natural state. I'm Lex Pelger. I'm sponsored by the National Cannabis Study, and they will pay you $100 to talk about your use of our favorite plant. Link in bio. You can also sign up for the newsletter where twice a month I curate the best of clinical cannabinoid science. We'll start with something for the neurochemistry nerds. As many of you would know or guess, the heavy use of cannabis lowers the levels of CB1 receptors in your brain. CB1 receptors were the first cannabinoid receptor discovered, and they're the most widespread receptor of their type in the human brain. And when activated, the CB1 receptors are the ones responsible for the psychoactive effects of cannabis. So, we know the heavy use of cannabis lowers the number of CB1 receptors in the brain, something like 10 to 20% depending on the study. This especially occurs in areas of the brain like the prefrontal cortex, which is the highest area of your brain responsible for much of executive function, in the temporal lobe, which is involved in communication, and in the cerebellum, which is involved in motor coordination. But if you stop using cannabis, within 2 days, your CB1 receptor levels are already starting to increase. And within about a month, your CB1 receptors should go back to normal levels. Then there are the changes in cognition. And listen, we all know that those old anti-cannabis drug ads were overstating the harms to the brain. The cannabinoids can be very neuroprotective, especially in neurodegenerative diseases. But as someone who collects all the cannabinoid science each week, I do see a bunch of papers saying that cannabis isn't causing any big changes to attention or memory or processing speed. But I also see a whole bunch of papers that do show problems in those domains. And of course, something like this is messy as hell to study in a lab. But in general, when you see conflicting data like this where some say no effect and some say a measurable effect, that usually means the answer is that an effect exists, but it's pretty moderate and it's here in the middle, and maybe it doesn't affect everyone. So to guess that cannabis use lowers cognition in some heavy long-term users seems reasonable. According to this review, after 1 week of stopping cannabis, your performance on tests of verbal learning and memory is already climbing back towards normal. But for things like motor control and sustained attention, those took longer to return to normal. Though part of this might be because for the first week, people are going through withdrawal and their irritability and lack of sleep may be interfering with their test scores. I know personally, if I take a break for 3 days, my dreams start coming back and they're usually nightmares. And since that makes me cranky the next day, my wife sometimes encourages me to go to the basement. Anyway, once the levels of CB1 receptors come back within the month, usually so do any deficits in memory function. But in the specific domains of sustained attention and executive function, those deficits could persist for months or even years in a measurable way. Of course, recovery patterns also vary by the age of when the person started using cannabis, as well as their level of use. And not surprisingly, people who started in their early teens show a less complete recovery than people who started using as adults. And in another unsurprising finding, heavy users required longer recovery periods. But in general, eventually cannabis users come back to a general similarity to non-users. So overall, your general takeaway is, it's better for your teenagers to hold off on starting cannabis. And for all you adults, a month of abstinence can show you if you would really feel different in how your brain is functioning.